Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. I'm delighted to bring you something a little bit special today. So the Northern Liberal Network has been set up to try and help Liberals in areas of the North to try and build, grow, inspire them and go out there and win more seats. And they had a special event about fighting Labour and they had brilliant guest speakers, and they've allowed us to put this as part of a podcast. Normally, you wouldn't be allowed to hear or see this. So thank you so much to the Northern Liberal Network for doing that. So the event will be in full after this little introduction from myself. If you like what you hear and like what you see, then please go check out the Northern Liberal Network. Go sign up to their mailing list and ideally join them. It's only £5. I'm actually the secretary of the Northern Liberal Network. So it's been a fantastic organisation with some absolutely top speakers and brilliant discussions since it was started in the wake of the 2019 general election. So here's the event. I hope you like it.
My name's Laura Gordon. I was the candidate at the last general election in Sheffield Hallam, which is currently our sort of last remaining Labour-facing target seat at Westminster level. After that, you kind of have to go all the way down to Cambridge before we start finding other places where we're really fighting Labour at Westminster level. And in a number of places where we were previously very, very competitive, we've fallen back a lot. And because of that, the party has just become very, very conservative facing at national level, with the sort of concentration of seats that are sort of Remain voting, conservative facing, and sort of look quite similar to each other. But we're very aware that locally that's very much not the case. So there are lots of places where Liberal Democrats are fighting Labour at local level, and all kinds of whether it's county, whether it's cities, unitary authorities, whether it's boroughs. And with a sort of big set of local elections coming up next year, we wanted to sort of take the moment to talk about how we make sure that we are competitive against Labour and starting to move forward against Labour in some of these areas, because we have some absolutely terrible councils that we're seeing, councils that take their residents for granted, and where people deserve better and where we want to give it to them. So I think it's important that we keep doing it. But I also think that from a kind of national perspective and in terms of the differentiation of the party, it's also really important that we keep moving forward in Labour-facing areas to make sure that we do keep that distinctiveness against the Labour Party. And although it's sort of very early days in terms of Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party, and that's something that will pose challenges for us in its own way, sort of compared to the leadership of the most unpopular leader of the opposition in living memory. We've also seen that Labour are not really standing up for the human rights issues and the sort of nationalism that many of us care about. So, it's very clear to sort of me as a Liberal that there's a hugely important role for the Liberal Democrats nationally in standing up for those values and for the people who are affected by those issues. But that in terms of the party's national messaging, that's never going to be the priority at the moment because the priority is so much on the facing areas. So we just wanted to take a moment to kind of come together as campaigners who are fighting Labour and sort of talk about how we're doing it, what we're doing, what's worked, what challenges we're finding, and sort of share ideas and think about how we can make sure that we're moving forward. So we've got a fantastic panel who are all campaigning against Labour in different ways. Shaffaq Mohammed is the former MEP for Yorkshire and the Humber, and is also the leader of the opposition and the leader of the Liberal Democrats on Sheffield City Council. Sheffield is somewhere where we are in a strong opposition position, hoping to take the council to no overall control next year and ultimately take control in the next few years. So it's somewhere where we're quite established in Labour facing. We've got Richard Kilpatrick, who's our deputy leader on Manchester City Council, where I believe we're also the official opposition, but in not quite as strong a position just yet. And I'm sure Richard can talk a little bit about that, but it's also somewhere where we have a very long history of campaigning successfully. It's somewhere where John Leach used to be the MP. And so Richard will be talking to us a bit about how you can build up if you're somewhere where you have a kind of established local party, where you have a record of action, but where you've fallen back. And finally, we've got Martin Haswell, who's our deputy leader on Sunderland City Council. Some of you may remember some of the spectacular swings that they've been achieving against Labour, starting from standing start in some wards and then, winning with 70% of the vote. They've also got, I don't know if Martin has any leaflets that he'll be able to show us at this point, but they've had some of the best leaflet headings that I have ever seen. Martin's has to be Haswell, which I thought was excellent, but I think the best one was get them out because they do now. So he can perhaps tell us a bit about how to use amazing leaflet slogans to win elections. So I'm going to hand straight over to Shaffaq. I'm going to ask our panel just to speak a little bit about some of their thoughts and their ideas, and then hand over to all of you for questions and also comments and experience. So we try to make these sessions quite interactive so that it's not just you sort of listening and learning for the panel, but all of us listening and learning to each other. Or from each other. So, if you've got thoughts or ideas, then please do share them in the chat or put your hand up if you'd like to speak. So Shaff, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Nice to see so many of you, be it online, and in particular, Edwin and Diana Simpson, good friends of mine from Doncaster, well, formerly of Doncaster, now moved up north, further north than we are. So the topic tonight, fighting Labour. Well, it's a crowded marketplace. First of all, I think you need to muscle in between the warring factions of Labour itself. We've seen that at first hand in Sheffield, a very much a tussle between the ultra-left and what I would term as the Blairites, and those fights still continue now. Still, some people have accepted Keir as their leader and others absolutely can't stand him. So what we need to do is to get in between those warring factions, but not to take fire from both sides, but actually take the opportunity to speak to our communities. And the one message, if I'm going to take it tonight, is to actually care about those communities and make sure they know that we care, to actually get involved. I know COVID is difficult at the moment, so therefore the traditional stuff that we always do as Liberal Democrats is not feasible. But like I say, we've still been doing, in case of Sunderland, they'll tell you what they've been doing in terms of campaigning. But in Sheffield, we've been delivering leaflets. We've been doing quite a few of the online campaigning. We've also done a lot of phone calls. Sometimes they've been welfare calls just to see how people are. And then we've done the straight canvas as well. Who would you like to run Sheffield Council? So what's our experience has been of Labour? Well, the market's changing. The seats that we targeted, say, a decade ago when Edwin was helping us trying to win Sheffield Central constituency, they're probably not in the market now, some of those seats. But other seats have emerged in the market. So if you look at our results in 2019, we won an area called Bayton, which is the southeast. It's an old pit village. But what's happened is a bit like a lot of towns and cities have changed. The old pit village has remained, but all the land around it has been developed. So a lot of new housing come on. And if we don't go and talk to them, somebody else might. So that's why I say it's a crowded market. The Tories might be interested, especially with the demolition of the Red Wall in a huge number of constituencies. The Tories are now interested at a council level. The Greens, in our case in Sheffield, are also beginning to branch out from those more traditional leafy Guardian reading areas that were Liberal Democrat after the 2005 elections post-Iraq, but now clearly fell out with us during the coalition years. So there are opportunities, and we've got to get involved. And we've got to look at that. Actually, there's a group of voters who feel left behind, often working class communities who, feel are Labour inclined, but are very badly let down by Labour. And what they want is someone to give a damn about their area, someone to actually turn up. And often people are flabbergasted when we've turned up and knocked on doors. And, I've had it said to me that I've lived in this city for 30 years and you are the first politician of any party to ever knock on my door. And often that's your way in to say, well, okay, well, do you want to change the area? Because if that's the situation, then, and I always say to them that if you want change and you want to change your city, you want to change your neighbourhood, you might want to change the way you vote. Because if you've always voted Labour and you're not happy with what you got, then you're going to move You've got to change. But like I said earlier, it's not straightforward. Some people are very much like, I'm Labour, always will be. That's fine. But what we do need to be smart in how we campaign. We need to start to look at the resources. We don't have an infinite amount of resource, particularly money. So we've got to be clever with the money we use. Absolutely use the technology that's available in terms of Connect. Mark registers are being key to our success in Sheffield. Being able to know where the voters are, which group of people vote. They're clearly important. And if anything, this last week in America has shown us about people who vote early, postal voters. It's one of the things that we tend to sometimes miss, that, we peak towards the end of April when some of those voters have already voted at the beginning of April. So we've looked at that. So we've run separate campaigns, and we have looked at issues that are not just always been traditional Liberal Democrats about human rights, civil liberties. We've also done the more local stuff at a local level. So we've challenged Labour around some of the issues around not opening up our sporting facilities in Sheffield. What we've discovered is that they've been misusing the council tax. Council taxpayers in Sheffield have been paying for leisure facilities in Scarborough, simply because Sheffield international venues will run some of the facilities in Sheffield, also decided to run these in Scarborough, and as a result, some of the losses made have had to be covered by the revenue in Sheffield. So there are things out there that we can look at in terms of challenging Labour. I mean, clearly, media-wise, Labour will always get a bigger hit than us, simply because they'll appear on Question Time more often. They'll appear on the regional news more often, because simply we don't have that many MPs. I think between Scotland and Oxford is only Tim Farron. But what we're going to do is be clever, use our House of Lords members where we have them. Like you say, use your ex-MEPs. You've got some in the North East, in Fiona. You've got myself in Yorkshire. You've also got Chris Davis and Jane in the North West. So we do have people that have represented the area at a regional level. Use them in terms of actually working hard. I mean, clearly, we've got to start to use Facebook a lot more, but we've got to use also the online petitions, etc. So we have started to look at what does work for us locally, and we are still sticking with leaflets. We've not got rid of leaflets. Anyone that says, "Oh, we can win online," well, clearly they've not taken heed of what's happened in America. It's not all been online. There's been a lot of groundwork as well, often well before the elections. So that's one key message. Don't rock up in March and decide you want to take on Labour in a council seat. You need to be active now or 6 months ago. So therefore, you've got to be strategic in your targeting. We're not going to win every seat in Sheffield, but we can target the seats we are going to win, and we've been very good at that. So we used our limited resources. Clearly, we don't know what the care effect will be. I'm not sure if that's totally come through the system yet, but at the moment, we can just still hammer Labour at the local level. I think there's been plenty of bad Labour councils. One example I've used in my home city has been an issue around COVID support for businesses. Simply, Labour councils have taken the eye off the ball here, where our colleagues in York, who've done a fantastic job of giving out all the business rate support they've had, and then had a 5% top-up. In my home city, Sheffield, we've had £16 million unspent. And those sort of things are resonating. This kind of thing of Labour's, they're in office, but not actually working for you. They don't care about you. So it goes back to my original thing of care about your communities and make sure you tell people you care. And that's what we've been doing. And I think it's showing results. Clearly, we always have a challenge in terms of trying to get our vote out. But I think in places like Sheffield, we will be making a comeback. And I always say that anyone with parliamentary ambitions, you've got to win at the local level first. That's always been our bedrock, that we started by winning things locally first, holding every council seat if possible, if not majority of them, and then you skip on. I'm not sure. I was speaking to Andrew Stunnell when we were doing the general election review earlier this year, and both was like looking at the local campaigns, and both was said, actually looking back the last 20 years, what seat have we won where we've not had a strong local base? And both me and Andrew were scratching our heads. We could not remember one seat that we've won in a normal general election period where we've not had a strong councillor base. So if you've got parliamentary ambitions to gain a seat locally, you've got to start winning local. And often in our part of the world now, it is Labour still, quite the majority of the seats. I know there's some Conservative facing areas, but I'll leave that for others to talk about. Okay, I'm going to leave it there, Laura, because I want to actually answer questions rather than just me making speeches here from the platform. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, thank you for speaking, Shaff. Richard, can I come to you next? I guess that's a sort of link. Strong local base as a springboard to future parliamentary ambitions. Are we going to be winning back Withington soon, or in the meantime, what are your plans in Manchester?
Well, I think that first of all, Laura, thanks very much for the opportunity to join everyone today. I think it is so important that we Labour-facing areas and those Tory-facing areas with Labour-facing pockets have the ability to share best practice, because I think past in the party we've not really maximised that to our best of our abilities. So thank you for the opportunity. So yes, Manchester. I mean, obviously we need to go back and really understand the level of regression that the party experienced in a city like Manchester. You know, from the largest minority group in the party in the country, you know, within touch and distance of control in 2004, to 0 councillors in 2014. So in 10 years we went from 36 to 0. Which is, and it, you know, has an enormous impact, not just on your relevance in my view, the country's second city, but also in morale as well, because that has, you know, we are a voluntary group of people who dedicate a lot of time and effort to winning elections, and that had an enormous impact. So when I first got involved, we had a member of parliament. We had a very small and dwindling number of councillors, and it became pretty clear to us that government base was certainly the place to start that rebuild, not just to build the party's relevance in a major metropolitan area, but also to create that local enthusiasm again. It's a little bit like, to put it in footballing terms, it's a little bit like your football team being relegated 2 times in a row. And Martin will be able to talk to us about that from Sunderland. As a Middlesbrough fan, I have to get that digging. But that's what it feels like. You know, you lose some of your best players, and suddenly you have to try and rebuild and steady the ship. So we had to really understand, you know, what it took, why it happened, and what we needed to do. And in our situation, you know, it's quite interesting, because I think that we're probably a few generations on from, say, Sunderland's situation, in that the Labour Party really learned what they'd done wrong. They'd learned that they'd taken areas for granted, and they started to respond to that. So they professionalised the way that they do things. You know, so we had to fight very clever. And we had to become quite ruthless in the way that we did that. So I think our main strength is that we have a very dedicated number of people who give everything all year round. You know, we have a mantra in Manchester that there is no such thing as peacetime. We are constantly fighting. And that's why we knock on doors all year round. We deliver leaflets all year round, because the machine of the Labour Party in Manchester, you know, they currently have of the taken seats. We have a couple of by-elections still to happen, but of the taken seats, they currently have 93 seats, and we have 2. So they have an enormous machine to call on. So we got our first foothold back on the council in 2016 with John. So that was 1 against 95. And then I was elected in 2018, which put us to 2. But in reality, you know, I'd already made the decision to stand and to fight properly in the place that I live, in my own community, 4 years previous to that. And I think that just goes to show the level of, you know, ingrained in the community that you have to be to fight Labour on that community aspect that Shaff's already spoken about. So I think, to summarise, in terms of, you know, what 3 points I would advise on how to fight and beat Labour. The first one Shaff's already mentioned, and I will try not to swear, but I always call it, you know, giving a caring. You have to really care about your community, and you have to care about it from top to bottom. You need to know every road. You need to know the issues on every street, because if you can beat the Labour Party on that knowledge of that community, then people will put their trust in you. And I think we can certainly tell a difference in parliamentary elections to our local elections, where in parliamentary elections, the Labour vote, especially the Corbynista vote in quite an affluent part of South Manchester, where we have our seats, is extremely high. The Guardian called it the new Labour heartland, the new red wall. But on a local election, they know that we will deliver that representation better and stronger than the Labour Party, which is an enormous thing to ask people that are traditionally quite a tribal voter base. The second point is micro-targeting. We will deliver street letters all year round about any issue, about anything that we've done, about any piece of casework that we've been successful on. And I see that Corby's joined. I mean, the amount of street letters that Corby in particular, who's joined this meeting, has delivered about a parking scheme in Didsbury. Since the week before lockdown, we've delivered 50,000 street letters in my ward. And the response that we get on that is incredible, because we're not putting political party nonsense on a leaflet like the Labour Party and putting it through people's doors. We're actually talking about the things that people want to hear about. We're talking about their community. And the third thing, and I think this is really important, and I think it's sometimes hard for Liberal Democrats that are used to fighting in Tory areas, is, the Labour Party aren't the good guys. They're not the good side. Actually, if you think for a second that the Labour Party are the good side, you're talking nonsense. In Manchester, we have a Labour Party who, with one hand, talk about ending homelessness in 2 years, and on the other hand, fine people for rough sleeping. We have a Labour Party that talks about social housing, but hasn't built a single affordable or social house in the city centre for 10 years. And in fact, the average house price in Manchester is now 300 times what it was the last time there was a Tory MP elected in Manchester. So you really need to challenge them on those issues, and we have to be willing to talk a little bit left, if you want of a better word, of the Labour Party on those issues, because we are liberal and we are strong on those issues. And we shouldn't be scared to fight the Labour Party on what we would traditionally think are their strong issues. And we need to be extremely ruthless as well, because if we think for a second that the Labour Party will let us off and somehow let us be the nice people of politics, then you've got something seriously wrong. They will be ruthless, and they'll be harsh, and they'll be personal, and you need to ignore the personal and fight on the issues. And that's something that I think that in Manchester we try and do, and we try and fight the Labour Party on those issues. And to date, touch wood, this is how we change hearts and minds, because if a person is going to vote for the Labour Party in a general election, you need to give them a reason to vote for us in a local election, and hopefully in the future change their mind in the general election. But thank you. I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Like, Labour are not the good guys. And especially when it comes to local campaigning, I think one of the things that we'll all know is that if you're fighting Labour, you need a thick skin, because they will just absolutely fling it at you. I think we talked about this on the Lib Dem podcast a few months ago. I don't think I've ever been abused in the street by a member of a political party other than the Labour Party. But with Labour, it's probably like 1 in 4 times, maybe. Like, yeah, not the good guys at all. So yeah, Martin, when you decide to try and win from nothing, how do you do it? Tell us all about it.
Thanks, Laura. So yeah, coming from a very different background situation at Sheffield, Manchester, we are going after seats where we did come from nothing. In 2015, the LibDems wiped out in Sunderland Council, and then we clawed our way back on in 2016 with one council, and we've been gradually moving forward since then. Initially, it's been through by-elections, targeting seats which were classed as no-hopers. So the seat I stood in, I'd actually started campaigning in the April. The by-election wasn't triggered until the November, but we were coming from a position of, we got 4% of the vote in last time the seat was up. And it was done through a lot of what Shaff and Richard have said about community campaigning, really showing an interest in what people are concerned about the neglect they get from the Labour-run council, from their own councillors, and showing that you can and will try your best to make a difference and do those street letters and street petitions on road resurface and whatnot. Another piece we really found resonated was honesty. So there was always considered to be some taboo subjects in Sunderland where you shouldn't criticise the council on, and it was always felt there were topics everybody wanted to hear about and everybody was concerned about, but nobody would dare say it. And you have to be the ones to say it. So going back to the leaflets you mentioned, this is one. Oh, it's the wrong way around, but doing now, kick them out. This one went through doors in the by-election. It was very much challenging on, nobody had seen their Labour councillors for decades. And we're clearly quite happy to take huge amounts in allowances, expenses. There was free buffets, free tickets to the local theatre, free tickets to the football matches, but we're never seen out on the street. So it was about challenging that record, but being quite brutal about it. Another favourite was, this is going to be back to front again, but Labour's plan for our area, nicely done in red, which then went out entitled 3 things: do nothing for 40 years, 2, just turn up at election time, and number 3 was claim millions in allowances. And those subjects, it was a bit tongue in cheek, so people remembered it and appreciated it, but 2, it was saying those things that everybody thought, but nobody had spoke about for a long, long time. I know there's been talk about referencing national issues and referencing national campaigns. We don't do it. There's very, very little. Maybe in wards we've held now for a couple of years, we may introduce them, but in a startup campaign, not at all. It's straight in from all about your local community. And in terms of online, we are trying to be encouraged by our region to get some more Facebook and social media stuff. But the elections we've won, we did 0. Absolutely nothing online. It was all done with face-to-face contact at the door, targeted literature using your marked register, just as Shaff was saying, because you will not win an election by social media. If you just put out a couple of tweets, nobody's listening. But if you're putting out a regular newsletter, going to people's doors, they will pay attention. And I know Rich was saying doing it all year round. We, even as soon as the lockdown hit, we started phone banks. As soon as we were released from lockdown, moved through tier 1 and 2, we were back on door knocking from an absurd distance from the door, but we were back door knocking. And now we're back in national. We finished that night, the Wednesday night door knocking. Thursday, we were out, on the phone banks, and throughout, literature's been going out to residents, keeping them informed, picking up casework. And we've used it as an opportunity to do some really what we'd call hyper-local literature. And it's even just individual estates, or half of an estate will get even a focus, just about 7 or 8 items that we're working on for those streets. And it's had a really, really good response. And challenge Labour's record as well. So we have gone after free buffets after council meetings. We went after free tickets to the West End shows at the local theatre, and we have won those campaigns and made sure we used the media and things like that and really challenged it. And especially when Labour are sitting there talking about food banks and free school meals and things like that, but are quite happy to have a £800 buffet after each council meeting. Goes down a stonker. And yeah, that's time for some questions.
Fantastic. So does anyone have any questions? Lisa, I think you said you had one. Do you want to ask yours?
Thanks, Laura.
I have some too, but I've talked quite a lot, so I probably want to, and also I get to see Shaff all the time, so I should probably let someone else have a go.
I don't get to see enough Shaff, so absolutely. No, I've got 2 questions, but one I'm going to ask is about fighting Labour fighting Labour in Tory areas or fighting Tories in Labour areas. And I know that the makeup of each of your areas is different, but I just wondered if you've got any thoughts for us, because in Stockport, we fight both the Tories and Labour, but they never fight each other anywhere. So we're the enemy of everybody. But I just wondered if the panellists had any thoughts on how best to approach fighting Labour in Tory areas or fighting Tories in Labour areas.
Yeah, so shall we just take a couple of questions and then go to the panel? Lord Wallace, would you like to ask a question?
It's William. I fought Manchester Moss Side twice in 1974, and I still remember that I particularly disliked a young Labour councillor called Graham Stringer. I wonder what happened to him. But what I really wanted to ask you all about, at the national level, there's a great argument going on about local government reform. And what it's about is cutting down the number of councillors, making councils larger, more distant from local people, and thus being more like agents of central government. Now, I've done most of my campaigning in West Yorkshire, where we have wards that are 10 to 15,000 strong each ward. It's quite difficult to cover the whole of a ward at that level. I'm strongly in favour of local government where you can know your own councillor. And what I would like to know is, one, what's happening in your area, and two, can we make the issue of real local government an issue for next year's local elections, which will embarrass Labour as well as the Tories?
Fantastic, thank you. Shall we take one more and then go to the panel? John, you said you've got a question.
Yeah, it's just responding a little bit. I mean, Ed Davey said in the campaign organisers meeting this afternoon that he will not be attacking Keir Starmer nationally, but we have absolutely no restrictions on what we can do locally. So I suppose that's to all the panellists. How are you going to get that balance right?
Should we go to Richard first this time?
Perfect, thanks, Laura. I'll take it in the order that they were asked. So on Tory facing, I mean, you know, in Manchester, we don't have Tories. They are extinct. I think it's, you know, you'd need Richard Attenborough and some Tory DNA to bring them back alive, I think, even though ironically, you know, over the river, it's a very different story. But we do, I think that it's really important, because I would not win my seat without the Conservative vote that exists in Didsbury. And I will joke about how the area is very champagne socialist, etc. But actually, it has a lot of very quiet Tories. And one thing that we do is we, every kickstart or anything similar, we won't necessarily spend a lot of time in training, but we will do things like map our ward out based on what streets we think are either Tory or Labour. And there's a lot of Labour areas, but there's also quite a lot of very affluent Tory streets. And so we've created a mail merge that is the traditional 4S groups, the traditional target groups within the party, but we've split it based on each polling district. So each polling district will get their own mail merge, and it'll be a take of that 4S group message based on a local picture, and what issues are particularly important for those areas. So we are very, very mindful of the Conservative vote in our areas, because without it, we would lose. And equally, I think we are mindful of the Labour switch vote in our area. And I think that, you know, if you applied it to areas like Stockport, for example, Lisa, like I imagine it's an unnatural thing to think about the Labour Party as an enemy, but actually they're the controlling group in the council. So it's sort of like switching mindsets and culture to say, well, actually, you know what, we need to go out and get these voters, like this group. And I think it's the same, but the other way around for us. So we've found that identifying Tories or soft Tories and specifically going out for the no daters and trying to identify them is the hardest bit. Because I'm not sure about Shaff or Martin, but it's actually quite hard. Like the Tories probably won't identify as anything. They will refuse to tell you what they are because of the culture in the area. So we've done quite a lot of work to try and identify what we've got. I mean, we've got the Tory vote down in Didsbury to a tiny percentage, but interestingly, Didsbury was the last place that a Tory represented in the city of Manchester. So without that vote, we would lose. So that's why we need to make sure that we keep on top of that. Local government reform. First off, Moss Side will not look like you remember it. I'm absolutely sure it has gone through a lot of regeneration, as a lot of the city. But on local government, to be quite frank, I don't think, and I might get into trouble here, I don't think people care. I honestly don't think people care. I don't think it's an issue that will come up. And I understand that as Liberals, we want to try and devolve power to the lowest possible domination possible. And I agree with it theoretically, but it's not an argument that's going to win any hearts and minds on the doorstep. And actually, if you look at some very recent examples, or the most recent example where we asked people whether they want more politicians, you know, the North East on the devolution referendum, they rejected more power on the basis that they did not want any more politicians. And I think that we have to get the balance right on, you know, being seen to want more levels of government. And it's easy for me to say that because my experiences of a unitary authorities, I've never lived anywhere else other than an authority that is responsible for 100% of the service. And I think that people do get very confused at that multi-level approach. And actually, as a councillor, it's harder to say, oh, I'm really sorry, I don't look after your road. You need to get in touch with someone else, or I can try and get in touch with the county, but you know, I can't guarantee anything. And this comes from my ward is, I have close to 14,000 residents. And it is very difficult to spread yourself that thinly, but it's not impossible. And I grant that my view is not necessarily going to be the view of the party. And then on the final question, on the Keir Starmer question, honestly, I have such an abundance of terrible local Labour politicians. I don't need to mention Keir Starmer. You know, so quite frankly, I just won't be talking about him because at a local level, I don't think it really makes a difference. And if there's one thing that I want to try and get across to people in the time that we've got, it's that this is a local, these will be local elections, and the local Labour record is outrageous. And I think that, I think actually I'm more concerned locally about Andy Burnham's current popularity rather than Keir Starmer's.
Brilliant, thank you. Martin, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to stick the order they've come in as well. So we're pretty much just fighting in. We don't have many Tories, and we are having a crack at trying to take one seat off the Tories in the coming elections. So I would say it's too early for me to be giving any advice on it. But we have done a lot of in the wards which we have gone for, which were Labour facing, has really squeezed that Tory vote that does exist. In my ward, there's two areas which is what you would consider to be Tory face, and it makes it about 20% of the ward, but it's actually a third of the voters. So what we did was put a huge amount of work into trying to encourage them across, and what we found was Labour voters just like to know that you were there, you came to see them, and occasionally helped out with a bit of casework. But actually, Conservative voters, I found, want to see something delivered before they necessarily switch to you, which I found was an interesting one. I know what Richard was saying about it was hard to get Tory voters to actually ID themselves. It's quite the opposite. We have pretty much managed to identify Conservative voters because they're quite proud to tell you they don't vote Labour. We really struggle with finding the Labour vote itself. I mean, it has dropped significantly. We've won a lot of them round, but we're now pretty much sure that the regular refusals and when there's a tactical not home, we're pretty certain they're probably the Labour voters because we just can't get that ID from them. It's very, very difficult. In terms of local government reform, I'm going to have to agree, nobody cares. They did have the referendum in the North East. The instinct I got was that people didn't want more politicians, but they actually didn't want more Labour politicians. Labour control nearly every authority in the North East, or did at the time, bar Northumberland. So they just didn't want more of Labour. It was just seen as another bunch of seats for them and their cronies, and more of the same. So yeah, it got knocked back. We have, I would say it's a reasonably good system. I would love 75 single member wards in Sunderland because we could cause chaos, but we're up in thirds. We've got 3 councillors for every 9 to 10,000 people. It works fairly well. And then in terms of balancing, not attacking Labour nationally, but still going after them locally, we don't reference Labour nationally. We're very much put across on the door that the Labour politicians in the civic centre are the same people who are your MPs and the same people who are going to Parliament and doing nout. And that's what you need. That's the message we push for, to say it's an irrelevance. It's still the same Labour Party, and what the things you get really angry about locally, that neglect, that lack of fighting for the area. When you reference the MP, they go, oh yeah, they do nout as well. And the messaging works. And so you can attack Labour nationally just without even mentioning Keir Starmer. Mention the local MP, that normally does the trick. That's a lot. Yeah.
Completely agree, to be honest. Yeah, I'll come to you in a sec, Shaff, but I'm just going to go on a mini rant because I just think that's such an important point. You know, we have these complacent Labour councils and Labour MPs that have just been taking these people for granted for decades, generations, just weighing the votes, because who else would would you vote for? You always vote Labour around here, so why should we ever bother talking to anyone? Why should we ever bother listening? Why should we ever do any work? We own this area. And you just the way that some of these seats fall over as soon as they're given a push by somebody who shows up and visibly gives a it just shows how desperate people are for somebody who they can actually see caring and actually see doing some work ever, and can actually see having some interest in fixing the problems in the community. And I think it's just so important that we keep fighting these people, because they just don't deserve the level of dominance that they've had, because they're rubbish and they let themselves be rubbish because no one's ever challenged them. And so, somebody has to, because people deserve better. Anyway, over to you, Shaff.
I'm just going to jump back, and that's where the massive swings come from. That's where it goes 4% to 64. It's because of that reason.
And it's not only Liberal Democrats can do that. We saw this in Barnsley last year, where the Democrats and veterans just came out of nowhere, won some seats. I know earlier I said we need to select our candidates early and have a track record of doing it, but we do have examples where things emerge, like a children's play area, a park that's going to be turned into a roundabout in Barnsley. The candidate there, Peter Fielding, kind of came to us in the new year in 2019, and by May he was a councillor with a massive swing. So sometimes these things come to you, and that happened because the only councillor we had at the time, Hannah Kitchen, gave a damn. So getting a bit more tougher now with words rather than caring, actually gave a damn, because the Labour councillors weren't listening. The Tories didn't care. They were just happy with their seats. So they needed somebody. And Hannah went and met with Peter Fielding, who wasn't a Liberal Democrat member, but his son was elsewhere in the country, and ultimately showed through actions that actually we cared about those communities. And as a result, we convinced Peter to stand. And then Peter won massively, won the postal vote, won on the day, massive shock to Labour. So clearly this issue around balancing, I'll do it the other way around. John's thing is, there is a balance between national and local. And actually we've decided not to mention Keir Starmer at all, because a lot of people probably don't notice that he's changed, the leadership's changed. And some of the areas that we're trying to win are very socially conservative. So therefore, they still remember Corbyn. So we said, this is the momentum supporting, Corbyn supporting Labour council candidate. We just keep flying that flag. In terms of Lord Wallace's kind of thing about the local government reforms, they are important, Lord Wallace, but I think what we need to do is say, this is how this is going to affect you. Your local councillors will now become even more distant than they were previously. And that in particular for Labour areas will mean non-existent. So I think we could talk to them in detail about the policy. I don't think they're going to buy it. But when they see what the impact of the changes are onto their voice, their influence, their connection with their local elected members in town hall, county hall, whatever it is, I think that's that emotional connection, Lord Wallace, that we need to have. And now going back to the first question about how we kind of challenge this issue about Labour and Tories. Well, you're not going to win your Labour-facing seats without winning over the Tories. So if you don't take anything else from tonight, just remember that phrase. To win Labour, we've got to win the Tories first. And once you won them, it's not a case of just putting a bar chart on and saying, can't win here. Actually, you've got to do it by deed. You've got to do it by the issue. So I think Martin was saying, well, the Tories will come over if you get a quick win. Well, you need to care. Because the Tories will also care about the environment. They might just have a slightly different way of caring about the environment. They might be in a semi-rural seat like Stannington, which is a ward in Hallam, that does vote Tory, but does care about the environment. It's just slightly different bits of the environment that we care about. So we need to emphasise the things they care about. And clearly they want value for money for council tax. So there's so many Labour waste stories to say they are wasting your time and they are wasting your, more importantly, your council tax. And clearly there's issues around support for businesses. So these are key things that Liberal Democrats have got a track record of kind of doing, caring about the environment, caring about jobs locally and businesses, that we can talk about either what the Labour councils has done wrong here, or like I said, look at your own council's business rate, what they're giving out, and just use York, constantly use York. They must hate York Council in terms of what York has done, because York's been fantastic. And it has resonated with people that, you know, what, Sheffield's got £16 million and it's not given support to this business, that business. And again, you've got to make that connection with people, that emotional connection, you know, in terms of like, you know, this candidate. So the other thing I normally say is we always will push a candidate's name and title because we have to. They're not going to just win on the party brand. They have to win as John Potter as well, the local champion. But all I'll say is John's got to have championed something locally. So just badging John as a local champion will sound very hollow if people can't say, yes, because John helped us with that bus service, or John helped us save the local swimming pool or the library, or, you know, helped me when we had this big planning application. But that's what we've got to have to do. We've got to have name recognition. You know, where we've won in Sheffield, in places like Mosborough, where, you know, in the normal election, we were fourth. 4 months later, we won the seat. And that was because people said, I'm voting for Gail Smith and the Lib Dems. And so therefore, you've got to have that brand name with the candidate and a track record and whatever interest they are. And clearly always the personal story helps. You know, why does Lisa Smart care about the ward that she lives in or she represents? Was she born there? Has she set up business there? That other side story. So I would say normalise the candidate. So they're not just seen as a robotic New Labour type candidate. They actually care. They're human beings. They're like me and you. We breathe the same air. We want the same thing. And actually, they're on your side. Okay, thank you, Laura.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you. So we've had a couple of questions into the chat, which I'm just going to pass on now. And then Paul would like to ask a question. So I'll hand over to you, Paul, in a second. There's been a bit of a discussion in the chat about how we do some of this on social media. So it'd be really good to get your thoughts on that. So Sam's example has been using sort of local community Facebook groups to post examples of successful casework. And sort of not being super political about it, but almost using it like a sort of online street letter, and whether that's something that people have done previously and whether it's had any impact, or, you know, actually if there's anyone else here who's done things like social media campaigning that has been effective, please do talk about it in the chat. I also had a question for myself, which was, I think it'd be really good to get your thoughts on sort of something we've talked about a little bit, is the kind of different sort of flavors of Labour, the different types of Labour areas. So we've got council areas, we've got, you know, at one end, and then we've got a sort of, you know, hipster, Corbynite, you know, at another end, we might have areas that have massive ethnic diversity, which will be traditionally Labour as well. And so they're all quite different. And what are there areas that we should be particularly targeting at the moment where you think our messaging is more likely to be effective and well received? Or is it something where actually, regardless of the type of community, we can win if we go in and we talk about those local issues that people care about? So that was mine. So yeah, the two was the online campaigning and then the different types of Labour area. But Paul also had a question. So do you want to jump on, Paul, unmute your microphone and then ask your question?
Hi, yeah, thanks a lot. I was interested, the three speakers all said things which I agreed very, very much with, community activism, which is the old Association of Liberal Councillors stuff back from the 70s and 80s, attacking the local Labour record, attacking the Conservatives. As Shaffaq said, you can't beat Labour without getting the Tory votes. We've just delivered 25,000 in our target county divisions with a front page blue headline, Conservative plans to abolish Chesterfield unveiled. And that's Lord Wallace's thing about local government reform. If the Tories want to create a huge unitary Derbyshire, that means they're going to abolish Chesterfield after hundreds of years of local government. They're going to increase the council tax because we have the second lowest in Derbyshire, and so on. So local all the way through. We did used to attack Corbyn, but we've not mentioned Starmer, and certainly won't do as far as I can see. So I agree with all the things the three speakers said. I was interested in the comments that certainly two of them made about not using national campaigns. We did in the 90s and 2000s when we were winning everything in sight in Chesterfield. We've not done for the last 10 years because they've done nothing but harm to us, national campaigns. So there are some signs that things might start to improve. But that leads on to the question, which is, we have a core vote strategy, which the party adopted about 4 years ago. And essentially it is to concentrate our main policies, our campaigning strategy, our campaign resources into educated middle class urban seats, particularly the Golden Halo. Now we're told about down around London and the southeast, but there are other odd ones like Sheffield Hallam and Hazel Grove and Cheadle, but not many outside the Golden Halo. I think that's a if we continue with that, it's a continued huge danger to stopping us making any serious advances north of the Watford Gap, basically. And I just wondered what our three speakers thought about that.
Okay, Martin, do you want to go first this time?
Thanks very much.
As the first north of the Watford Gap.
Hi, I was going to say that every other the speakers are southern as far as I'm concerned. So in terms of social media and online campaigning, I've kind of said that the key is going to be your target list of people who are on your marked register. Those are who you're going after, and really nothing is going to be better than door knocking and then literature after that. However, you can use social media, but I very much doubt it's going to win you many votes, and you have to be very clever to gather in data. So recently, so we do have a social media Facebook page. We post the stories that go on our Pray to Rain's website, or we share stories from the Echo, but the people who reply probably already are our supporters and have followed us for that reason. So we don't get a lot of traction otherwise. We do use our website, and that predominantly it's a data gathering exercise. We use it heavily for online petitions and surveys, which has been useful during COVID, but because it's our website, we get the data. So we get the phone number, the email, and the name of the contact. Whereas if you're using change.org or something like that, they hold the data and you will never see any of it. So it would be lovely to say, oh, I've had 2,000 hits on a petition. Don't know any of those people, so it was pointless. What you need is that data to know you then go back to those people, especially if you're then on your marked register. In terms of using Facebook or anything else for casework, there are resident pages where I live. And Wednesday is bin day, so every Wednesday night I get pictures of back lanes full of crap. So my Wednesday night is just spent being tagged, going on, higher I've reported it, and that's all I do. I don't message LibDem policy, I don't reference I'm a LibDem councillor, it's my personal Facebook page, and that's all I do. Hi Susan or hi Karen, it's been reported, it should get sorted in this many days, and that's about it. Now, that does come up on the door sometimes, and people say, it's really good, I saw you do that, but apart from that, there's no benefit, and I certainly wouldn't be marking them as contacted in Connect, because that's just lies. In terms of the going for which wards to target, I would say our best opportunities here are low-hanging fruit, which are in Labour-facing areas, are working-class communities who have been neglected by Labour for decades. So they are either your council estates or even older if you've got it, like Victorian, Edwardian housing stock, which possibly were cleared in the slum clearances. We've got some of that left. Those are still your Tory, your Labour-facing areas where Labour are doing nothing. Get stuck into them, and that's where you can win seats very quickly. In terms of the core vote strategy, it's a load of rubbish. Your core vote should be the local nanas. They are the people who, once you're on side, once you've delivered for them locally and showed that you care about their community, they will, honest to God, fight tooth and nail for you. There will be arguments in the street between nanas at the bus stop over how fantastic their local councillor is because you've got them on side. And once you get that community, once you are being discussed on the bus, so if Mark Pack's core vote strategy says get the nanas talking on the bus about their Lib Dem campaigner, then I'd be happy with it. Thanks, Laura.
Fantastic. Shaff, can I go to you?
Yep, thank you. Taking Laura's question first around social media campaigns. We did something beginning of June, I think it was, around the fact when there was some huge argument between the council locally, and it wasn't just Sheffield, it was a number of Labour councils and the teaching unions, around when schools should open further, because they actually never shut. It was a case of, do we open up for more young people? And so the big argument about government wanting something locally, people a bit nervous. And actually, we felt, well, hang on, what about the people that really matter? The parents and the grandparents, the carers, what do they think? So what we did was, we like doing these small little videos, short videos, no more than a minute and a half. And actually, we had a type form survey. And obviously, we had the cheeky little question at the bottom about at the next local election, who you're most likely to vote for. And we got the emails. And of course, we flew the flag with our own website. We tweeted it. A number of us tweeted the links. But actually, then we toned down the Lib Dem element of it. So rather than saying, I am the Liberal Democrat leader of Sheffield, on Sheffield Council, I just said, my name's Shaffaq, I'm the leader of the opposition in Sheffield Council. So it was a little subtle change, but actually that got me onto some of these more community sites. So it was about building a relationship, and I kind of said to them, look, we're really interested in hearing what people have to say. And we got like 1,600 people responding, which was really good. Then we made sure we did something with it. We took it to the Director of Public Health and said, hey, Greg Feld, you love coming onto News Night, talking about things. How about talking about this locally? So we kind of got him to talk about the issue. And then, of course, we used those emails to feedback to say, we've took this to Greg Fell, Sheffield Council, and by the way, government's changed this policy. We've done something similar with school meals. So straight away, when they had this big argument around free school meals in October, we straight onto it. And what we did a petition, and I thought the Labour Council is going to give free school meals here in Sheffield. Of course they are. So what we added in was also do it in Christmas, please. So that gave us legs. So we got 1,000 signatures there again. We got one of our, even though the survey went out in my name, the petition, I got one of my key council candidates in a very winnable seat to represent the petition. The Labour Council absolutely hated it. So much so they turned on him, which added, got even more. The normal people were more annoyed by the Labour Councillor saying, here's a young man who's just turned up to present a petition because he was on school meals once. And what does the Labour leader do? She has a go at him instead. So we've used that to our advantage. So you can use social media despite the lockdown, the situation we face. In terms of polls, core vote strategy, if we keep to the core vote strategy, we win the 10, 12, 15 seats. We've got to increase our market and the people we target. Paul, those of you who don't know him, was the MP for Chesterfield. And the MP before Paul was also Tony Benn. Not much similarities between them, but they both represented Chesterfield. And I'm sure, given the local base that Chesterfield has and the skills they have campaigning, that they should be able to target those people, because there is a group of people, and I think Mike's mentioned it on the chat here, that the turnout is 60, 70, 80% in some places at general. Usually the turnout is always less than 50% at locals. So there is a group of people here who will turn out for the general, but not local. And they're the ones that probably cost us some seats. I suspect they cost us in Hallam quite a lot, because we usually win the Hallam popular vote at a local level, but these extra people turning out. So we've got to start to think how we're going to deal with these extra people. Again, for a parliamentary point of view, but actually you've got them at local as well. Look at your box counts for your general elections. And if you did some box counts in your key target council seats and you realise, my God, the Tory vote here was massive, then it'd be safe to assume that all the new people, that i.e., we call it big pool and small pool. Small pool meaning the local council voters plus postal voters, and big pool meaning everyone that voted at general. So when you minus big pool from small pool, and you get the difference, they're the target I would say go for. And go for the, you will know your areas, you've got to walk your patch. Paul, if I threw some street names at Paul Holmes, I bet you in Chesterfield he'll tell me exactly which ward they're in and where they are. So you will know your streets because you walk the patch, you delivered every letterbox. And that way you'll say, hang on, this is a blue ward, a blue round in my ward here in this polling district. This has got more Tory-facing voters here. And this is a red ward. And then you can do that micro-targeting that I think Richard was talking about, where you do have a Tory-facing leaflet. But again, the message should be one that resonates with them. And unfortunately, the leaflets that we were getting at general election weren't driving voters to us. Unfortunately, they were driving, and Laura and Lisa know this at their cost, they were driving voters away from us. So what we put through letterboxes, we've got to also be careful. Are they going to get you more votes, or are they going to push people away? And I would say make sure that message that you have locally is the one that's going to bring those Tory voters to us. And if it's a case of it's a Tory seat, then do exactly the same with Labour. To say the Labour can't win here, but we're the better alternative to the Conservatives at the county level. John, that'll be your trick next year. Thank you, Laura.
Fantastic. Richard, can I come to you? And then we'll just do one more quick round of questions and then kind of a little round up and then end. So over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Laura. So starting off with social media, we do an incredible amount. We spend a lot of money on social media. And it is hard. Look, there's good social media and there's bad social media, right? And actually, I think the bad social media is when, as political activists, we pay too much attention to it. Like we'll scroll through comments and we'll scroll through Twitter feeds and we think to ourselves, "Oh, we're going to win this." Look what the left in this country generally thought they were going to get from that last general election. Whereas the rest of us were looking at those polls and looking at some of the feedback that we were getting on the doors. I spent quite a bit of time over in Cheadle. You were knocking on doors and. It was certainly not what I was reading on my own Twitter feed, because I'd created a community of like-minded people on my Twitter feed. So you just need to not listen to it, park it, get involved in it, get involved in conversations by all means, because you are either local politicians or wanting to get as many local politicians elected as possible. So by all means, put some content out there, but don't take too much notice of it. But the good social media, there's a number of things that you can do. And I think it's hard to change culture with this, because as Liberal Democrats, we're used to at least demanding some element of metric when it comes to a result, and like what Martin has already said. The reality of the situation is you cannot guarantee or track any relationship between a sponsored post and a vote at the end of it. And I think that's why, as Liberal Democrats, we feel that we are better off spending our time knocking on doors and delivering leaflets. Absolutely do those things. But my advice would be don't leave social media, especially some of the community groups. I mean, if COVID has probably been the only time of late that people that are maybe under the age of 40 have had to be forced to get to know their next door neighbours. A lot of people, especially in metropolitan areas, live in blocks of flats. Do they know the people that live above them and below them? Their definition of community has totally changed. Their community is now the people that they go to the gym with, that they're in WhatsApp groups with. They're people that that go to the park. They're young mum groups. All of those groups exist in your area. They will have Facebook groups. They'll have WhatsApp groups. Local estates might have WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups. Get involved in those, because the old Association of Liberal Councillors pamphlet by Tony Greaves, etc. If it was rewritten now, would have WhatsApp groups and would have Facebook groups written into it, is to get involved in those, because that's a good aspect of local community campaigning that you can do. But as the other speakers have said, it's not a replacement for the traditional stuff. It's something that you have to do on top. And then with your general social media, it's all changed very recently, actually, because of the US elections. So targeting has totally changed in the way that you can do it. But it is important that you put content out there, because the demographics that we now have, and someone's mentioned on the chat about that percentage of voter that doesn't turn out at local elections, but does turn out at general elections. And I'm going to be honest, the demographic looks like me in my area. Like, they're younger voters, they're young professionals, and they'll vote in a general election, but they won't vote in the local election. It's because no one's motivated them to do it. So actually what you can do on social media, which, by the way, is, 4 hours a day of screen time I clock up, that's how you get through to them. And okay, you might not necessarily want that group of people to come out and vote, so your messaging should be anti-Labour. It should be saying your Labour council's crap, and this is why. And if it motivates them to stay at home, brill. Or even better, if it motivates them to come out and vote Liberal Democrat, then great. So I would urge, and we have a bit of an issue in Manchester of convincing our local party that is worth money and time. But in my view, it certainly is. And I'm happy to share some of our previous campaigns for examples on that. Area differentiation, it's a really interesting question, because if you asked all of the three panelists, and most of the people join this meeting, to draw what their Labour vote look like draw a stickman version of your Labour vote, every one of us would draw a different one. Mine wear very expensive clothes and drink pints worth more than £5, and it tastes a little bit of flowers. Like, that's my Labour vote. Whereas, I think Martin's just balking at the idea of beer that smells of flowers. So, it is so important that we do that exercise. Actually, draw your Labour vote, draw it. Think about what motivates them, because the problem that you've got is that the Labour Party and their values hit them right here. They're like, I'm a Labour person. My father's father and my father's father's father, and they came from the pit and all that crap. This glorification of a pigeonhole of a class, all of that exists right there, and it's really hard to dislodge that. And that's what we probably have in common. So in terms of the answer to the question of how you deal with area differentiation, accept that it exists. My council estate votes overwhelmingly Liberal Democrat, because we've worked extremely hard on that council estate. The young professional area, it's a 50-50 split, but you know what? We've worked really hard to get it to 50-50. So there's area for improvement there, but I think just accept the differentiation, accept that you're probably going to have to change your message slightly on that geographic basis. One really useful thing is the old ALDC tactic of drawing your ward and, really getting to know the individual issues and demographics within that ward. That I always find that really useful, and I tend to do it every year, because anything can change, and I think it just keeps you on the ball a little bit. And then finally, on the national campaign stuff and on the core vote strategy, as a person that has delivered leaflets relatively recently in Sunderland, I can guarantee you that he's absolutely right. I walked past a bus stop, and they were talking about our Kieran. And they're all like, oh, look, there's our Kieran. We're going to vote for our Kieran. I was like, wow, that's incredible. It's absolutely true. Look, the thing is, in Labour-facing seats, you've got two choices. You either moan and groan about what HQ are not doing and what they're saying, or you just get on and do it for yourself. That's your choice. And I think that my advice, and if you want to win, is just get on and do it yourself. Don't take much notice of what the National Party's core vote strategy is. because you have to just get on and do it to create that local government base in order to win that parliamentary seat, if that's your ambition. Thanks, Laura.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we've been going for just over an hour, so I'm just going to read a couple of questions, and if we can get sort of quick answers from the panel, and if you can kind of wrap in any kind of parting thoughts that you have into your answers, that would be fantastic. So just some of the things that have come up in the question. Lisa asked about, we're currently in coalition with Labour in Cumbria and Wales. Is that something that we should consider more as a party? And what about at Westminster working with Labour? And how will that affect us? I think, particularly if you're winding up in coalition with Labour locally. One was around how we convince our own members of the importance of beating Labour locally. If we've got members who join the party because of Brexit or because of national issues, how do we engage them and convince them that it's worth working hard locally to displace a rubbish complacent Labour council? And then I guess the final question, and it's just a small one, is we had somebody just asking, how, if you've got an area where people have been taken for granted for a long time, how do you get people engaged and interested? If people are fed up with politicians and they're not they're not thinking of it as local elections as something that matters to them, how do you change that and engage them? So just some small questions. Shaff, can I come to you first again?
Well, so I was going to mention, which we did in Sheffield, and I really encourage everyone to do it, is that in areas that have been neglected and people have not cared and politicians have a bit of a bad name, I've encouraged my candidates, especially the newer ones that are standing for the first time. I usually go to conference, buy a bag load of rosettes, put my name at the back of them, and then give it to someone and say, right, next time you're out, whether you're delivering leaflets or you're just going to local shops, wear your rosette. Because what it'll do, it'll show that Lib Dems exist in that area. It will show that you actually care and you're proud of who you are. I mean, we did this with Richard Shaw when he was standing in Beachiff Green, which is a very split area. About 40% of the ward's semi-detached houses, very Lib Demi, and the remaining bit, 60, 65, 55% is council. And I said to Rich, get to the council estate. Labour don't care about this. The MP gets in every time. Show that you care. And now we've got 3 Liberal Democrat councillors there back again. So that is an issue that, in terms of how we kind of go into these, what are in essence Labour black holes, and where we've done this with the Brinsworth by-election elsewhere, we just said to Adam Carter, you're wearing this rosette, get out of the room now. So sometimes you might have to grab hold of the candidate and make them do stuff that they might not like, and as long as they kind of believe in you, they'll put up with you, they'll probably swear at you privately, but ultimately when they win, they're going to be all right with you. The thing I was going to raise, that was raised in the questions, but we didn't really talk about it, but I think it's really important for the party, is this issue around the ever-changing demographic in the country. This country is getting more diverse, not less. And unless we respond to that, we're seeing it in the cities, we'll see it in the towns. The EU migrants that have settled here now are beginning to have families. We're going to have to start to engage with them. Can't really say, they're only interested in issues of Europe. Well, Europe's happened. No, in places like Watford, they've actually got the current mayor there, not Peter Taylor, the Lord Mayor, so whatever the ceremonial is, Aga from Poland. She only came the last 10, 15 years to this country. So we've got to start to engage with these newer communities that are there to get them involved, but also the more long-standing settled communities, because what is happening is those long-standing settled communities are getting richer, getting more aspirational, getting more middle class, and are then moving into the Leeds Northwest of this world. They're no longer staying in Leeds Central. They're moving to Leeds Northwest. If we're not engaging with them, if they have constantly always voted Labour because we assume they vote Labour, don't be surprised if they do. So we've got to start to engage with them, seeing what issues they have as well. They might be more wanting to talk about national or international issues, then we've got to talk about those. That is an issue that I think as a party that we've got to, if we don't pay attention to it pretty quickly, we will get killed by that, because that'll be another group of people. Mr. Trump's seen that happen in America. I mean, that was a different set of circumstances, but I think in places like Atlanta, the black community there turned out in force, and I think that's what's been the difference. in Georgia between Trump winning and Trump losing, if I'm going to be honest. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shaff. Richard, can I come to you?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Coalition with Labour makes me feel nauseous, Lisa, even talking about it. To be honest, I don't know how to answer that question, because when you fight, I think sometimes you have to step away a little bit and realise that when you fight, I've never fought the Tories. I have a baby face, but I've been in the party for a long time, 14 years, and I've never fought the Tories. So I have to remind myself every now and again that this isn't personal. I've made this a personal fight by sticking with it. So it is hard, but I imagine it must have been hard when we went into coalition with the Tories for those Tory-facing areas that are used to the Tories being the enemy. And I think that as a third party, we're always going to struggle with that identity crisis to a certain degree. I think one thing I will always try and do is this is only a personal thing, is I always try and play the issue and not the person. And I think that on the issues, we are better than both the parties. That's why we're here, right? It's why we have the card. But it would be a very difficult situation that I would find myself in, and I think I hope that if there is a way to get rid of this Tory government, who ultimately are the most damaging thing to my community as well as many others in this call, I'm absolutely certain of it, then I will do whatever is possible, anything that is needed. But I know that locally, I need to get rid of as many Labour councillors as possible, because they're equally creating as much damage to my community as the Tory government. On the national issue and volunteers now to make them fight Labour, it's we have, as I said, like, we were relegated twice. We went from the Premier League to League One in Manchester, and we had a new team, and we had to motivate a new team. And actually, that new team were interested in Brexit. They were interested in proportional representation. That's fine, but I need them to be interested in the pothole and the council estate and Barbara, who gives me headache for not getting the leaves swept up. You know what I mean? Like, and I think the best way to do it is get them out there and get them talking to the same people that you talk to, and that made an enormous difference, because now we have an incredibly dedicated group of volunteers who know that we will be right on the issue, because they know how hard we work. And when they see that there's people in their community giving every spare hour of their time to try and make it a better place, what more motivation do they need? They stop talking to you about proportional representation and about Brexit, which is, a very good reason to join a political party. I'm a strange person. I joined a political party not based on issues per se, or at least I lost that motivation when I realized that I also really like winning things. And I think that, if we can convert as many people onto that, then that would be great. And then on engagement and interests, before I worked for John when he was the MP in Withington, I taught politics at a sixth form. And, you'd have I'd be desperately trying to get kids to sign up to a politics course. They're like, well, why should I be interested in politics? And you're like, well, you know what? When you go on nights out, and I knew that they went for nights out, even if they were 17, is they'd get in a taxi. And I'd be like, okay, so you're in a taxi, but who licenses the taxi? Who makes sure that taxi's safe? You go to a club, who licenses that club? Who makes sure that you're safe while you're in that club? Who decides that you're even allowed in that club in the first place? All of that is a decision-making process, and it's something that you care about as a, it might be the fact that they wanted to campaign for, reducing the drinking age, probably in Middlesbrough at that time, or anything else. There is a reason for them wanting to get involved, and I'm absolutely certain that there's a reason for anyone to get involved in politics. And I think that actually the most politically engaged part of my ward is the council estate. They just don't know it. And I think, if you do one thing for them, the loyalty that they will show you is incredible. And, in terms of where you should start there, because they don't just need you more than anyone else. They'll value you more than anyone else. And then some parting comments, I think. First off is how important this organisation is to Labour facing areas and the rest of the north as well, because we need to recognise each other. Because a lot of our challenges we share, and we should try our hardest to ensure that we share that best practice, because often it feels like you're working in a silo, and often you don't feel like you're getting any gratitude. Not that you need any, but it feels like you're often, you know, talking into a little bit of an echo chamber. So thank you, Laura and John and Lisa, for doing this and making it happen. And then the last thing I would say is, if the US elections, just to jump on the back of what Shaff said about Georgia, if the US elections have taught us anything, it's that ultimately empathy will beat populism. And there's one thing that Liberal Democrats have more than any other party. If the Labour Party have socialism and the Conservative Party have, well, lack of humanity, then we have empathy. And that's what we need to champion, and that's what needs to be at the heart of any ideology, if that's what people need to motivate themselves. So thanks, Laura.
Oh, sorry. Fantastic. Thank you. Martin, do you have any sort of parting thoughts?
Yeah, so just I'll be as quick as I can. Then working with Labour, it's got to depend on your local circumstances. In Sunderland, it should never ever happen. We would immediately be thrown back out of power or coalition or whatnot. We should remain the opposition or look to take control, because their reputation is horrendous, and they will always be the natural party of power in the city unless somebody's challenging them. Locally, it may be different for you, but that's where we are. In terms of convincing members, how we got them to agree to sort of join in attacking Labour, honestly, was getting them to either attend a council meeting, watch it on YouTube, or just hearing the anecdotes of what it was like, and seeing the way people were spoken to, the way you were treated, and how the city and residents were treated with utter contempt. They did the job for us. We didn't need to do any convincing. Show them what the Labour Party is locally. And then in terms of engagement, Richard hit the nail on the head. When you go into a council state and you hit on an issue which has been outstanding for decades and probably is a relatively easy fix, or just requires a bit of hard work and a long time just grafting at it, the loyalty is unbelievable. So if you're going to start anywhere, get stuck in there. And when it's also right when he says about they may appear the least engaged, but actually are the most affected. And once they are engaged, done. However, you will then get a message about everything that comes up. But that's a good thing. And then in terms of parting thoughts, there's two pieces of advice. Is one, targeting. You must target it, delivering every door, knocking every door. Yes, okay, it may be lovely, but if you can win a seat doing that in one ward, then you probably have the resources to do two. So go after two wards by targeting. If you've got that sort of money, we don't, so we have to target. We couldn't afford not to. And the other part was, again, it was loving this group. It's really useful because I imagine there's people in Blackhall areas who have in the north who are looking at the messaging coming from, that we're going to be targeting these Tory-facing seats, just holding their head in their hands, thinking I'm never going to get started. So keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. I'd just like to kind of reflect on a few of the things that have been said. I think some of the key lessons have come through loud and clear. Giving a crap and visibly giving a crap and telling people that you give a crap and showing people that you give a crap is probably the key. But I think the other one was just the really important point that a few people made a few times, is that not assuming whether or not somebody will vote for you based on where they live or how much money they have or what color their skin is. If somebody isn't voting for us, it could well be because we've never asked them to. And why should we expect someone to vote for us if we've never asked them? Like, would you? I wouldn't. So actually, we need to go out there, ask people for their vote and show them that we deserve it, and try that everywhere. And then that's the start of our way forward. But yeah, I mean, I think definitely it's hugely appreciated to have this level of engagement on Fighting Labour. And I think just to kind of reflect on some of the frustrations that people have raised, I mean, it's certainly something that I've felt as well. And, looking at where we did well in the general election, it was, London and the South East. And well, that's probably because we did a campaign that was mainly talking to people in, well, I call it rich Southeast Romania. So of course that's where we did well, and I'm just so worried with this party that we will end up in a cycle where we talk to London and the Southeast, and so London and the Southeast votes for us more, and so we go, oh well, we're doing better in London and the Southeast, let's keep talking to London and the Southeast, and suddenly we're in a cycle, and we've just been completely hollowed out in everywhere else in the party. And ultimately I didn't join a party that exists to represent, you know, rich people in Southwest London. I joined a party that was radical, that cared about communities, that cared about that cared about really empowering people and communities and letting people take control of their lives and live the lives that they want to and make the best of them. And that's the party that I joined, and the party that I want to be part of. And I want to be part of a party that takes the fight to these absolutely rubbish councils that have been taking people's votes, claiming to stand up for them and failing to do it for decades, and that demands better, and that ultimately, hopefully in Sheffield, we're going to show, as we have in York, that if we can take control of some of these councils, we can deliver better. So I think, you know, from a parliamentary perspective, I mean, it does come back to that on one level, because we have such an over-centralized country that everything kind of has to a certain extent. You know, at the moment, it's kind of just Sheffield, Hallam and Cambridge, and then you have to sort of look a long way back. But actually, you know, we will have a future in some of these seats, because who else is going to stand up for these people? And ultimately, I think what we know is how long some of this stuff takes. And I think Paul would probably be the first to sort of talk about this. You know, how long did it take to win Chesterfield? You know, it didn't take a parliament to win Chesterfield. It took loads of parliaments, because you have to have that base. And, you know, it might be that in some of these areas we're going to struggle to break through realistically, while Labour have a relatively presentable leader, and while the Tories are in power being their horrendous selves. But actually, if we're not doing the work now, there will be a time when Labour's in government. And if we don't do the work now, then we won't be positioned to take advantage of that. So, you know, if we want to win back Withington, if we want to win whatever seat you're in Sunderland, if we want to win Sheffield Central, why not one day? We need to be doing the work now so that we're lined up when that opportunity comes. And I think that, for me, you know, coming back to Stacey Abrams, who I'm sure would be a Liberal Democrat if she was in the UK, you know, she does all the work and she also loves Doctor Who. Like, of course she'd be a Liberal Democrat. But you know, it's that lesson of, like, she got beaten narrowly in the governor's race in 2018, and then she went and kept working. And so when the opportunity came around, when things lined up, the seat flips. But actually it wasn't in the last 2 years. It was because she'd been doing the work all along. And I think that's a lot of what we need to be doing as well, is just doing that work all along, so that when the opportunity comes up, as it did, you know, whether it's a local issue like Penny Pie Park, or whether it's a national issue like the Iraq War, we're lined up for it. So yeah, thank you very much for being part of this group and participating in this conversation. I think it's something that we want to keep doing. So let's we've all got lots of campaigns to be running. We'll be running some more events over the winter. If you are able to join the Northern Liberal Network, it is a bargainous £5 to become a member, which you can do via our website. The link is just a little bit up there in the chat, but we'll also email it around to people, and that does really help, just in terms of, you know, we don't have a lot of costs, but we do have some, and every little helps in terms of meeting them. And I guess let's hope to have this conversation again in maybe June, when we can hear about everybody's raging success in the local elections.